Welcome to the Skeptical Auditor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Hernan Murdock. Today on the show, we are joined by Trent Russell, founder of Greenskies Analytics, host of the Audit podcast, and co-host of the Audit Room. In this episode, we talk about two key perspectives to stay up to date given the rapid technological adoption within audit and our organizations. We also learn how we can work more effectively with data custodians within our organizations, and we share a very important career recommendation that will help you elevate your status as an internal auditor now and for many years to come. All that and more, starting now. Welcome to the Skeptical Auditor. I'm Dr. Hernan Murdock, and with me today, we have someone who has a lot of experience in a variety of areas related to internal audit. This is Trent Russell, founder of Greenskies Analytics, host of the Audit podcast, and co-host of the Audit Room. Welcome, Trent.
Thank you for having me. Always interesting to be on the other side of the Q&A part of a podcast. So thanks for having me.
So now you have experience on both sides of the microphone, let's call it that.
Right.
You are fantastic in terms of the different things that you know about. And again, by virtue of your role as a podcaster and so many other things that you do, you have some insights into a lot of the things affecting the profession and also what auditors are sharing about their experiences. But I'm curious about how you got into this field in the first place. So how do you become an internal auditor related to this line of work, this profession?
Yeah, the program that I came from in college was really good about bringing in Big Four and huge Fortune 500 companies, et cetera. We had great relationships with them. So I had a really good relationship with Ernst & Young before I even interviewed with them. And so that's really how I got into it. I basically saw them present 3 years in a row. And it just so happened that the year I graduated, they were voted like best company to start your career with. And so when I got the offer, I was like, well, why would you want to start literally anywhere else other than the best one to start with? So that's how I got into audit in general. And then from there, I think, natural kind of progression for folks that leave external audit, public accounting, they go into internal audit. And so that's what I did. But even when I was in public accounting, I specifically remember, and I've told the story before, I was looking at terminated users and testing that. And so we had a list of all the terminated users, and I had a list of all the users, and we'll just call it the GL. And someone that I was working with, a senior, said, hey, you use a VLOOKUP and look to see if anybody that's been terminated is also in the listing as having user access, and then we can test all of them at once instead of having to take this sample, et cetera. And so I did that, and that's like where it kind of clicked for me in terms of the value of analytics can add. And to me, it was just like, what? Like, why do we not do this everywhere? And then I found out even more about like ACL and these tools that can automate it. And I was like, you guys know, at this given client, they had over 60 in-scope applications. And so it was like, we can test all of these next year in about 45 seconds by pushing a button, right? And so that's when it just like it sparked in my brain the importance and the value of using analytics within internal audit. So that's kind of where I got my start.
And may I ask what year that was?
That was 2010.
Okay, all right. Because as we talk about the evolution of the profession and how we have, let's call it, improved our methodologies, this is one of those dynamics where we have been talking about. I started in audit in 1998, and we were already working with ACL and Excel and various other tools that were available, again, rudimentary by today's standards, but we were doing a lot of modeling back then, a lot of data mining and analytics, and it was surprising a lot of clients, but it was available then. Fast forward 2010, and you're telling me that there were auditors who were still surprised by the ability to do VLOOKUPs and to be able to look at two variables at the same time. So again, we are seeing how we have, in some cases, moved too slowly, given the availability of resources that we have available in the world based on tools that, you mentioned ACL and Alteryx and so many other tools that are available. We need to fast forward our profession as relates to that. So we need to continue to advocate for our revision of our methodology, because just sampling, especially non-statistical sampling, in many cases, I don't want to confuse our listeners either. There are some procedures that you cannot perform with data analytics, but we need to use some creativity and our imaginations to identify areas where this might be doable. So how about another thing that is very near and dear to auditors, and that is in terms of risks and trends and technologies, things that are impacting the profession. And of course, the world is moving very quickly in all of those dimensions. So this is a very somewhat of a complex question, I understand. But what do you see? What do you anticipate? How do you see things evolving that auditors need to be aware of and pay attention to? Because this, if it's not affecting them yet, it very likely will affect them soon. What do you think in terms of risks, trends, and technologies that we need to keep our eyes out for?
I think there's two ways to look at it. One is, what can we in internal audit use to better ourselves and better our engagements and et cetera. And then there's, okay, what is the organization using and how much understanding of that tech do we need to have in order to properly audit it? And so, for example,
Yes.
machine learning, which if I boiled it down, machine learning is just being able to make a prediction on something. And so, again, I'll give the example. If you have like a transaction list and you know this transaction was fraudulent, this one was not, this one was, you can build a model to then say, hey, predict for me the other transactions that might be fraudulent. And so that's kind of machine learning example in a nutshell, very, very simplified version of it. And so I don't have this expectation that every audit department should have machine learning models and like a true data scientist that's a PhD statistician. But we should have this like basic understanding of data and analytics. But on the other side of that, if you have an internal audit department, it's very likely somewhere in the organization they're using machine learning themselves, either developing the models themselves or using some vendor provided software that kind of does that for them, or the vendor does it and kind of sends it back. And so I think what's going to be very important, because there's a ton of risk associated with machine learning. One of the more infamous examples is Amazon. They get thousands of resumes a day. They don't know how to sort through those. And so they built a model to say, hey, let's take all of our 5-star employees that we currently have. Let's build a model that we can run against all these resumes that are coming in. And the model will say, we think this person's going to be good, this person's going to be good, this person's not going to be good Amazon worker. And so from there, you can dwindle down that process of onboarding and all the interviews and all that kind of stuff, which is great, like fantastic idea.
The idea sounds good.
Yeah, and yeah, it does. The issue there was because Silicon Valley and tech is male dominated. The resumes that from the population that they came from were all primarily male. And so if someone from an all-female college applied, the model would go, well, we don't have anybody from that school. Or if you have, women's tennis champion, or, as a horrible example, we don't have any women's tennis champions here. So it kicked that out. And so there was bias in that model. To Amazon's credit, they realized that and fixed it. But those are the types of things that can happen with machine learning. And so again, we don't necessarily need to understand how to develop those models. We do need to have an understanding of how to audit those to mitigate that risk of the model producing some undesired result that we did not know it was going to be. So I think those are, again, kind of two different sides of it, but that's how I tend to look at it.
It's interesting that you bring this up, because I am hearing two different things. One of them, of course, what you just highlighted, because it creates this bias of hiring people just like me. And as humans, we sometimes struggle with that. And there's a whole body of knowledge trying to correct for some of those biases. But then we also have this other dynamic where we are looking at the ethics of the machine learning and how it goes about being developed and applied. And we probably also need to keep that in mind. So as auditors, we need to understand not only how much is spent on this technology, how it is being developed and the modeling happening behind it, but the ethics as well. So there's a lot of room for us to intervene and add value and verify that the organization is keeping an eye for these type of possible downsides to this technology. Now, one of the things about it, just curious, and we don't have to get into specifics about pricing, of course, but my understanding is that machine learning in RPA and so on, the cost has gone down substantially. So whereas a few years ago, it was usually the very large organization that could afford these technologies, now the price point for a lot of these things is so much lower. So even those listeners who work for organizations that are very small should be on the lookout, because their organizations could be adopting machine learning and RPA because of the lower price point. Is that an accurate statement?
Yep. So basically the older technology gets, the cheaper it becomes. And so there are, analytics tools out of the box that have machine learning type functionality in them. So you don't have to be a programmer anymore necessarily to be able to do some of this work. For the most part, it's fairly like drag and drop, and there's a GUI interface that you can use. And so they've made it easier. Again, not only does it become cheaper, but usually over time, technology becomes easier to use. The example that I'd like to give is, if you think, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, if you're going to develop a website, you had to like type every little thing. I want this picture to go right here, and I want it to be this size. Now, like, you just go to a website creator, grab a picture, and you want it to be in the top left corner. You just drag and drop it there, and it works. And so that's kind of the shift in data, especially less hard coding, more kind of drag and drop, user friendly type tools.
Okay. Yes, because I think that sometimes people feel that, oh, we're not going to be embracing that. I can say the same thing for things like blockchain and other technologies, Internet of Things, for example, where I say, well, my organization is too small. They probably won't be doing this for a while. Should look into it, ask and confirm, verify, because you may be surprised by what may be happening in your other departments. Trent, let's take a short break. But when we come back, I'd like to continue this conversation because we're touching on some very, very interesting points, and I'd like to pick your brain a little bit longer. So we'll be back in a few moments.
This episode is brought to you by ACI Learning. Are you looking for CPE credits, professional development, to continue your education, or a custom team training solution? Here at ACI Learning, we've been building high-quality training for over 40 years, meeting the needs of every learner. Our training solutions will keep you and your team engaged and motivated to learn, helping students stay sharp in their field and better serve the organization. Join thousands of global audit, risk, and compliance professionals. Visit acilearning.com to find out how we're disrupting the audit learning space.
Trent, we have been talking about data analytics and technology, and one of the things that becomes apparent is that in many cases we need to get data. And that data may be held by IT or other data custodians. So one of the questions that I have is, what do auditors usually not get about working with these units when it comes to trying to make this process of embracing the analytics more fluid, more effective, more productive for everyone involved? What are the things that auditors should keep in mind when trying to work with these other units?
One thing, and I think it surprises people when I say this, is empathizing with the person that's going to be providing the data. Like, they have so many, there's so many responsibilities on them. Data is what drives the organization. And so if something, tech failures happen, I don't think that's a shock to anybody. And so things break, they need to go fix them. They have production support. I mean, they have a ton of responsibilities. Usually IT departments are understaffed and under-resourced. And so I would always go into those going, hey, look, I know you have a lot of other stuff going on. I just need X, Y, Z. And then, what's a reasonable time frame for you based on like what you have going on in your day-to-day. And so I think empathizing with them has always been almost key to the relationship there. I think the other thing is, if you don't have the data background and you can't speak their language, be upfront about that. One of my favorite things, especially when I was in external audit and I had to audit Windows AD, Unix, Linux, Oracle, SQL, SAP, PeopleSoft, like there's no way I could be an expert in all of those. I could barely be an expert in one of those. And so I'd tee those conversations up like that and go, look, it's impossible for me to be an expert on this. You do this job every single day. You're the expert. Please, understand that I will, it's not even likely, I will ask a dumb question. And so I just need you to understand that and reiterate. I think the other piece would be, the objective, like this is why we need this data. I think when people go in, it's just like, hey, give me all the data. They're like, well, no, what do you need it for? I have other stuff to do. So if you can't communicate why it should be a priority to them, then it's just going to fall down into the back of their backlog and delay getting the data, which tangent here. Data acquisition is usually the number one reason people can't move up kind of the maturity model. So how can you use, how can you do it timely if you don't have the data and you need to get that timely? So overall, it's really it's as much about soft skills as it is about anything else, and being able to empathize with that person and build a relationship with them to where you can call them up and be like, hey, can you run that thing for me one more time? I'm sorry, we need it again for the last 6 months. And so everything boils down to relationships. And so just kind of keep that in mind, even for the uber dorky tech people.
I like what you say in terms of building that relationship. And how we need to think about also soft skills. Because sometimes what happens is that we are so focused on the data analytics, on the formulas and the templates, and looking in terms of how we can mine the data and so on. And we forget that in many cases, we're talking about people that we need to interact with. So I like your perspective on that, because I think it's so accurate that we need to make sure we give that some time as well and value that relationship, and also a little bit of empathy. They have other things that they're doing, and we need to be mindful about that as well. So with that, though, one of the things that I'm curious about, and over the years as I've done different audits in different organizations, one of the things that becomes apparent is the question between asking someone for the data and getting it yourself. And in some cases, the data custodians don't want to make it available to the auditors because they're concerned that they're going to run routines that will slow down the system. They may do something and create a big problem somehow if they were to override something or make mistakes. So we have some concerns, and I appreciate that. And I always tell them that I only need view only or be able to extract the data itself. But sometimes they have some reservations. So in general, Trent, what do you think about auditors learning not only how to use the tool, but also being able to do the extraction? Is that something you hear often, or is that still an outlier and we usually default to asking others for the data? What's your experience with that?
Typically, if there's a full-time data analyst on the team, that's like one of their primary, jobs is to get data and get direct access to it. And so for those, I that's pretty common. For the folks that don't have a dedicated analyst, I wouldn't expect that. The thing that I would do, though, the thing that I would do, though, is go, okay, what data do we need pretty consistently? Like usually, I know on the IT audit side, we needed new hires, terms, transfers. Like we needed that for so many of our procedures.
Right.
That's what I would like tackle almost first as a way to think about it. And you can do it one of two ways. Like you can, if they won't give you direct access because it's HR data, it's sensitive, and you might blow the system up, which side note, it's almost like a rite of passage for an analyst to connect to a data source and then bring the system down. That we've shared those stories in my audit analytics group about like, how did you bring it down? Well, I did that. So anyway, that happens.
So just a matter of time.
Yeah.
And everyone has a story.
But what I could say is like, if you have that data set that you need access to on a frequent basis and they won't give you direct access, there's other ways around that. I mean, the person that's pulling the data can automate the job. They can run it for you. It'll run on a monthly basis, and they'll drop it on a shared drive or drop it on your SharePoint or something like that, so that you can still get the data, although you might not be able to plug in directly to the data source. So there's always a solution.
That's great advice there in terms of thinking in terms of what you may have as a recurring need. That's a great tip there as well. And of course, this also touches on the importance of IT governance and making sure that we are able to trust the data in terms of integrity, the completeness and the reliability of the data that we're pulling in case new databases are created and how that might impact what we do. So very important thing to keep in mind. So as we're talking about all of these skills, and if you're having a conversation with someone who's looking in terms of enhancing their career, right? A lot of our listeners are probably very curious about how they can advance in this profession. So from a career perspective, what advice do you have for them?
Do what makes your brain happy. It's very hard to be self-motivated. And we've talked about this in the past. You can't just force somebody to do some of this stuff. You can't just force people to do analytics and be brilliant at it. And so if you find like whatever that little sliver is that makes your brain happy, take that and then blow it up. If that is like, I hate report writing so much. It was one of my least favorite things to do. Like, I'm fine doing all the audit, I get to the report and I'd be like, I don't want to do that right now. But I know there's people who have, lit backgrounds and that's what they enjoy. And so if that is, then like hone in on that. There's tons of resources for like improving audit report writing. And then you can own that piece for the team. Like, you're the go-to person, the same way you might have a data analyst who's the go-to person. You can be the go-to person for, basically reviewing all the audit reports and giving feedback on those. And that's a huge, the audit report is like, our product. You'll hear a lot of people say. So if you can own something like that, I think that's gonna make you stand out. So find whatever little thing makes your brain happy, and then just blow it out of the water in whatever way that that kind of makes sense.
Become an expert at it. I like your example about the report writing for a number of reasons, and one of them is that other person who was not working on that audit will see things a certain way, will perhaps ask questions similar to what the readers will be asking because they were not part of the team that did the audit. So that will hopefully enhance clarity when that report is published. And the other thing about that too is in terms of consistency of the tone, right? That person is the one that's looking at all of the reports. So hopefully they will have a consistent look and feel, which might be very helpful to the organization as well in terms of how they're viewed by our clients. So, Trent, in terms of career, and one of the things that I believe, and I think from my, the many times that we have interacted, you have this thing about not only looking at the data, but also looking at the soft skills. And how important it is to be able to do the number crunching, but at the same time convey the results, convey the implications, and turn it into a call to action. So how do you see that in terms of career advice and career advancement for those people who may perhaps be so embedded into the statistic that they sometimes forget? Do you think that is something we also perhaps need to have a Post-it note next to our computer and say, always remember that it's not for you, it's for the ultimate reader?
Yeah, it's huge. And I would always see in resume or job postings, like for data jobs, like, it must be an effective communicator. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, put that on there because you have to put that on there, but nobody's going, oh yeah, that's me, I can do that. Or, well, I can't, I'm not an effective communicator, so I'm not going to apply. I just thought it was kind of like, we have to put that out there until I started working with like hardcore data people who did not communicate effectively. And they were basically like, lock me in a closet, give me a laptop, let me do my thing. I don't want to even talk to people. If you can't communicate the results effectively, which is such a huge missing piece, like, I've failed in that context in the past. I would do all these great analytics. I would provide zero context to the auditor that's using them. And they're like, I don't know what this is. I'm not even going to use this. And so the communication piece is huge. And you're going to start to see more and more about things like telling storytelling with data, those types of topics, because we have these like brilliant data scientists that are doing all this great work, and then the results make it to management, and management goes, I don't know what to do with this. And so I think that's going to be a really important skill set that earlier we talked about finding that like little sliver of what makes your brain happy and blowing it out. Telling a story with data is going to be one of those things that you could really add a ton of value on. Very niche, but it is huge in terms of importance.
Trent, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I always enjoy talking with you, and you're so generous with your knowledge and your perspective on things. So thank you very much for joining us on the show today. Thank you for listening to the Skeptical Auditor podcast, and a big thank you to our guest, Trent Russell. If you're looking for more ways to stay ahead of the curve and earn CPEs, check out Audit Pro TV On Demand, subscription learning for auditors by auditors. Visit acilearning.com/auditprotv.